I didn't just disappear. I executed my vanishing like a military operation. 3 days, that was all it took to dismantle an entire life. The beauty of being married to someone who never paid attention to the details, the bills, the leases, the bank accounts, was that she assumed everything ran on autopilot. She never noticed who actually kept the lights on. I knew exactly where every lever was, and in 72 hours, I pulled all of them. I closed our joint account and moved my half into a new bank she'd never heard of. I canceled every utility under my name: electricity, internet, water. Even the Netflix account she obsessed over during exam breaks vanished overnight. The apartment lease, she assumed it was joint. It wasn't. It had been only in my name for years. When the rent came due, she'd find out the hard way. By Saturday morning, I was loading the back of my old pickup truck with the only things I considered truly mine: clothes, my grandfather's toolbox, the porcelain dishes my grandmother left me, and my collection of vinyl records she always hated. Everything else I left behind. Let her keep the curated furniture, the expensive coffee machine she swore we needed but never used, the color-coded binders of study notes. If those things defined her new life, she could have them. My destination, Portland, Oregon. Not because I had roots, they're precisely the opposite. I wanted a blank canvas, a city where no one knew my name, where no one would connect me to the woman in the white coat who had just graduated. The apartment I found wasn't glamorous. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, the kind of view that looked out over a parking lot instead of the skyline she always dreamed of. But when I signed that lease, my lease, in my name alone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ownership, freedom, work came faster than expected. Within a week, I was wearing a hard hat again, this time as a project manager for a mid-sized commercial construction firm. The pay was decent, the hours fair, and best of all, nobody cared about my personal life. No one asked about late-night study sessions, canceled vacations, or whether I was being supportive enough. They just wanted me to build, and that I could do. Meanwhile, in the city I left behind, reality began gnawing at her. The first sign came when she tried to pay the rent. The landlord didn't accept "I'm a doctor now" as currency. 3 days later, the power was cut. Soon after, the internet went dark. Only then, I imagine, did it hit her. I hadn't been the dead weight. I'd been the foundation. Her texts started small. "We need to talk. This is ridiculous. You can't just vanish." I saw the notifications flash across my screen and swiped them away without opening a single one. By the second week, the calls came in torrents: 20, 30, sometimes 50 in a day. My phone lit up like a slot machine, and every time, I let it ring into the void. If she had anything truly important to say, she could write to my lawyer. By the 3rd week, she was desperate. She showed up at my old job, asking for me, calling herself my wife. My ex-supervisor called to warn me. I thanked him and told him the truth. "I don't have a wife." Month 2. She tried to use me as a reference on a rental application, only to learn my old number had been disconnected. Then she reached out to my sister, my parents, even my college roommate. All of them gave the same answer: "We don't know anyone by that name." The breaking point came in month 3. She found my new company and called the head office, claiming there was a family emergency. My boss passed along the message. I told him the truth: "There's no emergency. I don't have family by that name." He understood immediately and flagged her number as blocked. While she spiraled, I thrived. Portland suited me. The coffee was better. The people minded their own business. I joined a local hiking group, rediscovered the kind of silence you can only find in the woods, and even signed up for night classes and project management. I was rebuilding, piece by piece, and for the first time in almost a decade, none of it revolved around someone else's dream. I even started dating again. Nothing serious at first, just conversation, laughter, companionship that wasn't centered around exams or hospital rotations. One woman stood out, a graphic designer I met at a bookstore cafe. She had her own apartment, her own car, her own ambitions. She listened when I spoke, and when I told her I was divorced, she simply nodded and said, "Good for you." Knowing when to leave is a strength. No psychoanalysis, no judgment, just acceptance. By month 6, I stopped even glancing at her calls. My routines had nothing to do with her. Wake up at 6, coffee while reading the news, work from 7 to 4, gym or hiking afterward, dinners with friends, or a quiet night with a book. Simple, peaceful mind. The irony was sharp. She told me she wanted to start over with a blank page. She thought that meant erasing me. What she didn't realize was that I gave her exactly what she wanted: a life without me, but I also claimed something she never expected. My own blank page, and I was already filling it with a story that had nothing to do with her. The silence was my armor. For months, I lived as if she didn't exist, and honestly, that was the closest thing to freedom I had ever known. But silence to some people is unbearable. It eats at them. To her, it became a black hole she couldn't escape. The texts grew more frantic. First, "We need to talk." Then, "I made a mistake. Please call me." By the 2nd month, her words had shifted from confidence to pleading. "You don't understand what I was going through. I didn't mean it. You were never a burden." And finally, by the 3rd month, I can't do this without you. Please, I need you back. But I didn't bite. I didn't even open the messages. The previews alone told me enough. Regret, desperation, attempts to rewrite history, and then came the social media circus. I didn't see it firsthand. I had deleted every account under my real name long ago. But friends still in my orbit sent screenshots. There she was, on Facebook and Instagram, painting herself as the abandoned victim. Posts of old wedding photos with captions like, 8 years gone in a moment. Some people just walk away without warning. She turned her betrayal into a sob story, hoping strangers would sympathize, but the internet isn't kind, especially not when the truth leaks out. Under those posts, people commented things like, "Didn't you divorce him the day you graduated?" Others who knew us back then chimed in, reminding everyone that I was the one working double shifts, footing every bill, sacrificing vacations and nights out so she could chase her dream. Suddenly, her narrative started to crumble. Instead of sympathy, she got judgment. Words like gold digger, user, selfish popped up again and again. It must have stung. She had always cared about appearances. To be the brilliant doctor with a tragic love story probably felt like a badge of honor. Instead, she was exposed as the woman who cashed in her husband's devotion like a scholarship fund and then called him dead weight. I should have felt vindicated. Maybe part of me did, but mostly I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. For so many years, her approval or disapproval had dictated the rhythm of my days. Now, even her humiliation online didn't move me. It was like watching a storm on TV, loud, destructive, but far away. Meanwhile, my life in Portland kept blossoming. My hiking group became a second family. We climbed trails every weekend, shared beers afterward, swapped stories under the stars. I was healthier, leaner, stronger. Even my boss noticed the change, handing me bigger projects with more responsibility, and the woman from the bookstore cafe. We had started seeing each other more often. Simple dates, dinner, walks along the river, evenings curled up with a movie. Nothing dramatic, nothing transactional, just two people who liked each other's company. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so equal, but back in her world, the spiral deepened. She started posting cryptic stories late at night, half quotes, half confessions. Sometimes you don't realize what you've lost until it's gone. Starting over isn't as glamorous as it sounds. Some of her colleagues began unfollowing her. The supportive comments dwindled. Instead, trolls appeared, echoing the same words she had once thrown at me, dead weight. The irony was brutal. By month 9, she wasn't just calling me. She was calling anyone connected to me. Former co-workers, distant cousins, even people she'd met once at a holiday party. One of my buddies called me up, laughing. "Dude," she messaged me on LinkedIn asking if I'd heard from you. I told her I thought you were in Alaska raising sled dogs. I thanked him for the cover and went back to my beer. Her desperation painted her into a corner, and the more she clawed at the silence, the less she understood. Silence was the answer. Because here's the truth, she never grasped. Love isn't measured by how loud someone begs for forgiveness after they've broken you. Love is measured by the years they don't betray you in the first place. And she had already spent 8 years showing me exactly where I stood. Life in Portland didn't just stabilize, it flourished. For the first time in almost a decade, my days weren't dictated by someone else's schedule, someone else's dream. They were mine. My mornings became rituals of peace, coffee brewed strong. The newspaper spread out on the table, quiet music humming in the background. No slamming doors, no frantic shuffling of textbooks, no accusations that I wasn't supportive enough. I went to work rested, not hollowed out by exhaustion. I worked hard, but at 5 o'clock I clocked out, walked away, and didn't carry anyone else's burdens on my shoulders. The construction company valued me in ways my marriage never did. When I finished a project, they noticed. When I worked overtime, they paid me fairly. Promotions weren't promises dangled like carrots, they were offers with signatures on paper. Within the first year, I moved from project coordinator to senior manager, a title earned, not begged for. On weekends, the hiking group became my therapy. Every trail we conquered, whether a muddy incline or a forest path kissed with morning fog, felt like a metaphor. Each step carried me further from the weight of the past. We laughed over beers after climbs, swapped stories around campfires, and for once, I wasn't the husband of the med student. I was just me. And then there was her, the graphic designer from the bookstore cafe. What started as casual coffee turned into dinners, then into weekends spent together. She had a way of listening that didn't feel like obligation. She had her own ambitions, her own bills, her own life. She never once hinted that I owed her my time or money. The difference was staggering. With my ex, every conversation was about what she needed. Tuition, textbooks, silence for studying, another sacrificed holiday. With this new woman, every interaction was a partnership. If I cooked, she cleaned. If she paid for dinner, I picked up dessert. When she talked about her day, she asked about mine. For the first time, I felt like I was in a relationship built on balance, not servitude. It wasn't some fairy tale whirlwind. It was better, it was steady. Meanwhile, through whispers and secondhand gossip, I heard my ex-wife's carefully curated future unraveling. The glamorous vision she'd painted of life as a newly minted doctor with money, status, and freedom had turned into a grind of 80-hour work weeks, endless debt, and exhaustion so deep she sometimes slept in her car between shifts. The apartment she fought for in the divorce. Gone within 6 months. Traded for a cramped place with roommates because the bills drowned her. The prestige she thought would shield her. Reduced to snide whispers from colleagues who knew she'd dumped the husband who paid her way. Even her so-called friends distanced themselves once her story hit social media and the comments branded her as selfish, manipulative, a user. The universe has a way of balancing scales. She thought she had discarded dead weight. In reality, she had kicked away the foundation stone, and the house she built on ego and ambition collapsed. But I didn't revel in it. Not really. I didn't gloat. I didn't text her back with "I told you so." Because by then, I had learned something vital. The sweetest revenge isn't humiliation, it's living so well that their betrayal no longer matters. Every sunrise hike, every promotion, every quiet dinner with someone who valued me was proof. Proof that I wasn't peso morto. Proof that I had always been more than she allowed herself to see. And the more I built my new life, the less I thought about her. Her name became a ghost, drifting further into the past with every trail, every laugh, every night spent in peace. Until one day, she found me again. Her world was unraveling faster than she could stitch it back together. At first, she wore the white coat like armor. A brand new doctor, she believed the world owed her something for the years she spent buried in textbooks. But reality was harsher than any exam. Residency wasn't prestige, it was punishment. 80-hour weeks, back-to-back night shifts, barely enough pay to cover the student loan interest piling up on her account. The debts weren't small. They were monstrous. 6 figures that had once been our responsibility now weighed squarely on her shoulders. She had forced me out of the picture, convinced she could handle it all alone. Now, she was learning that ambition without support is like a skyscraper without steel beams. It collapses under its own height. The apartment she claimed in the divorce turned into a financial noose. Rent, utilities, groceries, all bills I used to quietly shoulder devoured her income. Within 6 months, she was broke. Savings gone, credit cards maxed, reputation slipping. She brought in roommates just to keep the lights on, the very lights I used to pay for. And people talked. Colleagues at the hospital whispered behind her back. At first it was admiration. She's independent, she's fearless. But stories travel fast, especially online. Screenshots of her posts surfaced, the ones where she painted herself as abandoned. And when the truth leaked out that she had divorced me on graduation day, after 8 years of my sacrifices, the sympathy dried up. Instead, she became a cautionary tale. Nurses muttered gold digger. Residents rolled their eyes when she complained about exhaustion, as if her suffering was any more noble than theirs. On Reddit threads and Facebook groups, strangers labeled her manipulative, selfish, toxic. She had wanted a new life story, but the internet wrote one for her. The doctor who betrayed the man who built her future. Meanwhile, I was thriving. At work, I was promoted again, now managing multi-million-dollar projects, with a team that respected me. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was excelling. The hiking group became family. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, milestones together. I was healthier, stronger, happier. My new relationship, though still young, was solid, built on mutual respect and equal effort. The irony was cruel, almost poetic. She wanted independence, but instead, she found isolation. She wanted prestige, but instead, she was buried under debt and ridicule. She wanted freedom from dead weight, but in truth, I had been the structure keeping her life from collapsing. The breaking point came one night when her car broke down, catastrophic engine failure. Repairs cost more than the car was worth. In the past, she would have tossed me the problem like a math equation and expected me to solve it. But now, she was alone. Credit cards maxed, loans pending, no savings. She spent 3 months dragging herself onto buses at dawn, standing in the rain, arriving late to shifts she couldn't afford to miss. Eventually, she managed to buy a beat-up used car, with monthly payments that ate into her already fragile budget. That was when regret set in. Real regret, not the performative kind she posted online. The quiet kind that kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling. Realizing she had burned the only bridge that ever held her weight, she started to remember me not as the peso morto she had mocked, but as the man who kept the roof over her head, the bills paid, the lights on, the meals warm, the chaos managed. The man who believed in her when no one else did. And regret, when it blooms in the soil of failure, is the most toxic flower of all. That was when she decided to find me. Not just hope I'd come back, not just leave messages unanswered, but actively, desperately hunt me down. 2 years of silence didn't stop her. If anything, it sharpened her obsession. She had exhausted the obvious channels, calls, texts, family, friends, even LinkedIn messages to people I barely remembered. All dead ends. I had erased myself too thoroughly. For most people, that would have been the end. But not her. Regret makes people resourceful. She started digging. At first it was amateur detective work, Google searches, Facebook stalking, posting in random forums. Then she escalated. She hired a private investigator, cheap, desperate, the kind who overpromises. He traced old addresses, former employers, even my college roommate. Nothing. All he delivered were invoices she couldn't afford. But she didn't stop there. Somehow, during her residency, she abused her access to restricted medical databases. She started looking for my name in hospital records across multiple states, hoping I'd eventually show up for something, a routine checkup, a lab test, a broken bone. It was a reckless gamble, illegal as hell, but desperation doesn't care about rules, and against all odds it worked. One day a record popped up, a basic health screening, covered by my company's insurance plan. It listed Portland, Oregon, and a construction firm. That was all she needed. 3 years after she handed me divorce papers in a parking lot, she had finally found me. But what she didn't understand was this. She hadn't found the man she discarded. That man no longer existed. I wasn't the husband pulling double shifts, eating frozen dinners, waiting in silence while she studied. I wasn't the man willing to be called dead weight in exchange for scraps of affection. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. By the time she narrowed her search to Portland, I was thriving. My career was climbing higher than I'd ever imagined. My body was stronger, leaner. My weekends were filled with laughter on mountaintops, not tension in dimly lit apartments. My heart belongs to someone new, someone who saw my worth without me having to prove it. She thought she was chasing a ghost from her past. But what she was about to run into was a version of me she would never recognize and never again have access to. And when she finally reached out, the flood began. The first call came on a Tuesday morning in March. My phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, then another, and another. By noon, I had 17 missed calls. By nightfall, 23 more. At first I thought it was telemarketers, but then the voicemail started. Her voice, shaky, urgent, but unmistakable. "I know you're getting these messages. Please, just let me explain. I made a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life. I never should have called you dead weight. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Please pick up just once." I didn't listen past the previews. Delete, next, delete. The following day, the desperation escalated. Different numbers, different tactics. Sometimes she tried calm, professional tones. "We need to have a serious conversation about the past." Other times it was raw and emotional. "I can't do this anymore without you. Please, I need you." By the end of the week she was calling my work phone. The receptionist at our main office buzzed me one afternoon. "Hey, there's a woman here saying she's your wife. She insists it's a family emergency." My stomach sank, not from fear, but from recognition. She had actually shown up. "Describe her," I said. The receptionist did. "Perfect match. Tell her I'm out of state on a project for 2 weeks. Take her number and let her know someone will return the call." Should I actually call her back? No. That night she left a handwritten note at the office. My supervisor read it to me over the phone. "We need to discuss our future together. Please don't ignore me." I almost laughed. Our future. She had killed that the moment she handed me an envelope in a parking lot. When that failed, she got creative. She started roaming Portland. Friends spotted her at coffee shops, bookstores, even hiking trails, showing strangers my old wedding photo on her phone. She posted in local Facebook groups, searching for my husband. We lost contact after my residency. "Please help me reconnect." My girlfriend was the one who showed me one of those posts. We were cooking dinner together when she scrolled through her feed and froze. "Isn't this you?" she asked, tilting the phone. It was a photo from years ago, me in a tux, her in a wedding dress. The caption dripping with nostalgia and regret. "Yeah," I said flatly. "That's my ex." Her face tightened. "She's really out here broadcasting this to the entire city." The comments under the post were brutal. Strangers tore her apart. "If he wanted to be found, he wouldn't have disappeared. Sounds like you burned the bridge yourself." Others speculated about what kind of betrayal could drive a man to vanish so completely. For once, the internet wasn't wrong. And still, she didn't stop. The calls kept coming, blocked numbers, burner phones, even hospital lines. My phone became a slot machine of desperation. 17 calls Tuesday, 29 Wednesday, 41 Thursday, each ignored, each blocked, each deleted. Her obsession had become a storm, but I wasn't standing in the rain anymore. I was indoors, warm, dry, watching lightning flash outside my window, untouched, because what she couldn't grasp was this. Finding me and reconnecting with me were two entirely different things, and the latter was never going to happen. It was only a matter of time before silence wasn't enough for her. She wanted a confrontation, something she could sink her teeth into, and she got it, just not the way she imagined. It happened on a Friday afternoon. I was on site, hard hat on, reviewing blueprints with my crew when my supervisor's voice came through the radio. "Hey, can you come to the front office? Someone's here for you." The tone in his voice was uneasy. When I walked in, I didn't need an introduction. There she was, sitting in the lobby, still in her hospital scrubs, dark circles under her eyes. She looked thinner, more frantic than I remembered. In her lap sat a crumpled folder, probably filled with whatever script she thought would win me back. "Hi," she breathed, like we'd just bumped into each other at the grocery store, not 3 years after she detonated our marriage. I didn't sit down. I didn't even take off my hard hat. What are you doing here? Her eyes searched mine, desperate. We need to talk. I made a mistake. I didn't mean what I said at graduation. I was under so much pressure, I didn't know what I was throwing away. I kept my voice level, steady. You called me dead weight. Remember that. 8 years of sacrifice, erased with 2 words, and you didn't just think it, you believe it. You meant it. Her lips trembled. I didn't, not really. I was scared. I thought I had to prove I could stand on my own, but I was wrong. You weren't holding me back. You were the one keeping me together. I almost laughed. The irony was sharp enough to cut steel. You don't get to rewrite history now that your life's a mess. You didn't trip over a word, you made a choice. And I made one too. I signed. I walked away. That was final. She reached out, fingers trembling as if she might grab my sleeve. Please, just hear me out. We had something. I stepped back. No, I had something. You had a safety net. There's a difference. The room was quiet except for the hum of the receptionist's computer. She was frozen in place, probably wishing she could melt into the desk. My supervisor stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching like a referee at a boxing match. I love you, she whispered finally. The words landed like a hollow echo. Too late, too weak, too rehearsed. I shook my head. You love the memory of me. You love the man who paid your bills, who stayed up nights so you could sleep, who sacrificed everything for you. But that man doesn't exist anymore. I buried him the day I left that parking lot. The man standing here, he owes you nothing. Her eyes welled, spilling tears down her cheeks. Don't say that. I don't want a scene in my workplace. I cut in firm. You need to leave now. My supervisor nodded at the security guard by the door. The guard stepped forward gently but firmly. Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to go. She stood, wiping her face, looking at me as though sheer desperation could change the outcome. This isn't over, she said softly, but it was. It had been for 3 years. I turned my back on her and walked away, leaving her in the lobby with her folder of regrets and her tears. The whispers started almost immediately among my coworkers. By Monday morning, everyone knew some ex-wife had shown up begging for another chance. Some looked at me with pity, others with respect. I didn't bother correcting their assumptions, because the truth was simple. The chapter had closed, and no matter how many times she tried to reopen it, the story had moved on without her. Months passed after that lobby scene, but she wasn't finished. Her desperation clung to me like smoke. Even when I ignored it, it seeped into corners of my life. The calls slowed but never stopped. The messages turned from pleading to bargaining. Just 5 minutes. We can start fresh. You owe me that much. But I didn't owe her a thing. By then, my own life had reached a new chapter. My relationship with the graphic designer, steady, patient, genuine, had grown into something lasting. A year together turned into 2. Shared dinners turned into shared holidays, and eventually, shared plans for the future. When I asked her to marry me under a canopy of Oregon pines, she said yes without hesitation. No conditions, no drama, no ultimatums, just yes. That engagement ring was more than jewelry, it was a declaration. I had rebuilt myself, and someone chose me not out of necessity, not out of convenience, but out of love. Word got back to my ex. I don't know how, maybe through a mutual contact, maybe through one of her obsessive searches, but when she found out, the storm reignited. The confrontation came one Saturday afternoon. I was at the hardware store, loading lumber into the back of my truck, when her voice cut through the air like a ghost. Please, she said, standing a few feet away, looking ragged, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Don't drive away. Just 5 minutes. I turned, arms crossed. 5 minutes for what? Her face crumpled. To say, I'm sorry. To explain. To beg for a second chance. I closed the tailgate and leaned against it. Detached. You had 8 years of chances. You spent them all. And you burned the last one in a parking lot 3 years ago. Tears streaked down her cheeks. I was drowning. The pressure, the exams, the debt, it twisted me. I didn't mean those words. Not really. I regret them every single day. I tilted my head. Do you regret the words, or do you regret losing the man who kept you afloat while you thought you were swimming on your own? She flinched, as if the truth was a slap. Both. I was wrong. Please, let me fix this. We had something worth saving. A bitter laugh escaped me. We didn't have something. I had something. I gave and you took. I sacrificed and you built your future on my back. That's not a marriage. That's a transaction. Her voice cracked. That's not fair. Fair. I stepped closer, my tone sharp. What's not fair is calling the man who carried your life dead weight. What's not fair is treating love like a loan you never intended to repay. What's not fair is thinking you can walk back into my world now that yours is collapsing. She sobbed openly now, hands trembling. I love you, I always did. I just lost sight. No, I interrupted. You didn't lose sight. You saw clearly. For the first time in 8 years, you told me what I was to you. Useful, disposable, a placeholder until you didn't need me anymore. That wasn't a slip. That was honesty. The only thing that's changed is your situation, not your truth. Her face crumpled with despair. What can I do to prove I'm different now? Nothing, I said coldly, because I'm not the same man you threw away. The man who would have believed you is gone. The man standing here doesn't want you. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. Finally, she whispered, "You're seeing someone else, aren't you?" "Yes," I said, and then I let the final blow land. "I'm engaged. We're getting married in September." It was like watching her collapse without falling. Her knees buckled slightly, her breath caught, her hand pressed to her chest. "No," she whispered. "No, it's not supposed to be like this." I shook my head. "It is exactly what it's supposed to be. You wanted a clean slate, remember? A life without dead weight. You got it. And I got something better, a life where I am loved for who I am, not what I provide." She broke then, tears spilling freely, her voice barely a rasp. "Please, I can change." I climbed into the driver's seat, rolled down the window just long enough to say, "The man you're begging for doesn't exist anymore. Stop chasing a ghost." Then I drove away, leaving her standing in the parking lot, clutching her regrets like they could somehow resurrect the past. 2 weeks after that hardware store encounter, she made her final, desperate play. It was a Tuesday morning at the office when my supervisor buzzed me. "She's back. Says she's a doctor, here with urgent information about your health." A lie, another performance. I sighed, adjusted my jacket, and walked to the lobby. There she was, still in scrubs, hair tied back, looking worse than ever, like regret itself had hollowed her out. "Emergency medical information?" I asked flatly. Her shoulders slumped, the act dropped. "I needed to see you. You won't answer my calls, you won't give me a chance." "You're right," I said. "And here's the only chance you're going to get." I pulled 2 envelopes from my jacket pocket. The first was thick legal. I handed it to her. "This is a restraining order. From now on, any attempt to contact me, calls, visits, letters, showing up at my house, my office, my friends' homes, will be a matter for the police." Her hands shook as she took it. The second envelope was smaller, elegant. I placed it gently on top of the first. "And this," I said, "is a wedding invitation. Mine, September, Portland. My fiancé and I wanted you to understand something. I didn't just move on, I built a life. A better one. A life you'll never touch again." Her face drained of color. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers, the embossed letters, our names entwined, the date set in bold. She stared as if the ink might rearrange itself into different words. "My fiancé knows everything," I continued. "The marriage, the divorce, the way you hunted me for 3 years. She isn't threatened because she understands something you never did. When someone chooses you every day, not out of convenience, not out of desperation, but out of love, that's what real partnership looks like." Tears blurred her eyes. "This is cruel," she whispered. "I made mistakes, but this is too much." I shook my head. "Cruel would be letting you think there was hope. Cruel would be pretending 3 years of rebuilding could be undone with an apology. What I'm giving you now isn't cruelty, it's clarity." Her lips trembled. "Do you forgive me?" "Yes," I said. "I forgave you a long time ago. That's the only reason I was able to move on. But forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. Forgiveness set me free. It doesn't return me to you." Security waited quietly by the door. She clutched the envelopes, tears streaming, her voice breaking. "I still love you." I stepped back. "No, you love the memory of the man who carried you. But I buried him 3 years ago. The man in front of you belongs to someone else now." The guards guided her gently out the door. She didn't fight. She just looked back one last time, her face pale and streaked with sorrow, before disappearing into the daylight. I never saw her again. In September, under a canopy of Oregon pines, surrounded by people who had walked beside me during my rebuilding, I married the woman who had chosen me not for what I could give her, but for who I was. During my vows, I promised to choose her every single day, and she promised the same. That was the difference. Choice, not utility, not convenience, not obligation. Choice. And as I looked into her eyes, steady and certain, I realized something profound. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living so fully, so joyfully, that the people who threw you away are forced to watch from the outside, knowing they can never come back in. She wanted a fresh start without dead weight. I gave her exactly what she asked for, and in the end, she discovered the cruelest truth of all: the dead weight had been holding her entire world upright. I walked away with peace. She walked away with nothing but 2 envelopes, a restraining order, and a wedding invitation. Justice served cold.